Hi, I'm Victoria Hagaman. Welcome to my studio. I've just finished this large acrylic painting called Summer Garden. Painting garden scenes chock full of flowers is one of my favorite things to do. It's been one of my best sellers over the years. And perhaps you're looking at that thinking, wow, that's a lot of flowers. I wanted to do something more simple. I'm going to take you through the steps of how I got in the background, got the flowers on top of it, and the same steps can be used for a smaller, less complicated painting, but it'll help you see how I achieve this layer upon layer look that's so special. If you're interested, I hope you'll stay tuned. Here's a reference photo that I found on Pixabay, and I just love all the texture of the grasses and the mixture of wildflowers. I wasn't crazy about that single sunflower smack in the middle, but we're going to address that with our thumbnail sketch. So I'm doing a thumbnail in my sketchbook, and you'll notice that I did it as a square because the canvas I'm using is a square. One of the tricks with doing these paintings with grasses is you've got to get the background in dark enough, otherwise the grasses won't show up on top of it. So what you're seeing in that square box is a mixture of, and I just took a big brush, I was real loose with it, nothing precise. I'm using sap green, which is that darkest green. I use some burnt umber, which is a brown, or burnt sienna, which is a reddish brown, and a couple of lighter greens like a chromium oxide green and an olive green. The way that I put my flowers in when I'm doing one of these floral scenes is I figure out where the largest flowers are going first, which are typically sunflowers if I'm including sunflowers. And then I start dropping in the next size flowers, which were zinnias in this case. And then I put the little bitty filler flowers in at the last. So it just gives me a bit of a roadmap before I jump on my canvas, and I have found that it's time well spent. So here I have my 24 by 24 inch gessoed canvas. I gessoed it because I'd actually started another painting with it and just covered it back up. I'm using a really big, flat, thin, cheap brush, huge strokes, and I'm just dropping in these different greens that I'm using. That darkest green on the right is a Utrecht sap green, which I do not recommend. I just had a big tube of it, and it actually had a little bit of a sheen to it where the rest of the acrylic paints did not. So that was a little bit of an irritant. But you see me dropping in some brown. I've got some chromium oxide greens in there. I'm just trying to vary. There you can see it from the front. Just trying to vary that and get it dark enough so that when I lay the grasses on top of it, they're going to be highlighted enough. You've got to have enough contrast or everything will just blend into kind of a middle value. Now I am going lighter at the top because there's going to be more sunlight at the top. I'm adding in a little yellow oxide or yellow ochre into that at the top. Here's a screenshot of me with the finished block in of the background with my little thumbnail drawing that I did first. Notice that I've got some really super dark areas, not everywhere, but plenty of darks, particularly at the bottom, and some areas in the center. That's going to give us good drama and contrast. One tool that's just invaluable to me when I'm putting in a flower like a sunflower is to draw the face of the sunflower in first. And that face might be facing up at an angle, it might be looking down, it might be looking straight at me. But once I get the center put in, then I know how to attach the petals. And I like having an odd number of the biggest flowers. So I didn't want the one big one in the center. So I'm going to do 3 flowers, and I'm careful to do them so that they're all facing slightly differently. And you do that by using the center of the flower either at an angle or full on or looking down. Sorry for my shoulder there. I'm using a small round brush to do my drawing, and I'm using burnt sienna, which is a reddish brown, just to kind of get that blocked in and gives me a little bit of a roadmap. I'm going to be using cadmium orange to put light spots on those sunflower faces, and I'm going to be using burnt umber, which is a super dark brown. to do the outside edges of that sunflower. It's going to give it some nice depth. Sometimes I'll also use black for sunflowers, but I just decided to keep this painting a little softer, so I'm sticking with my browns. So I'm using some fairly large flat brushes to put the petals in for the sunflowers. I'm using yellow ochre and a little bit of burnt sienna mixed together. So I'm trying to keep it very natural looking. I'm doing big strokes. A couple of tricks with doing sunflower petals. I have found if you will have some flat spaces, some more spiked, longer places. If you'll leave a little gap here and there between the petals, it just helps it look more realistic. And be mindful that if you're doing a sunflower that's tilted away, the petals coming out from it are not going to be the same as if you were looking at it full on. The closest petals to you are going to look shorter than the petals across. I also like taking a petal or two and pulling it into the inside of the center of the sunflower. Here you see me going back with a cad yellow medium, and I might have mixed a little white with that, and I'm just putting some highlights on top of that. I ended up going back over these sunflowers a second time and making them richer and darker, but this is just kind of the block-in stage. But you can see that the petals at the top of that face and the far right appear longer than the ones that are closer to you. And here you have a screenshot with that second sunflower put in. And because that one on the left is facing more straight on, you'll notice that the petals on both sides of the face of the sunflower are closer to the same length than the one on the right. I then took my same liner brush and I just started drawing in the outlines of some of the larger flowers. I ended up not liking that flower and painted it out later on, so I'm not going to spend too much time with that, just showing you how I start putting in, again, the next largest flowers. And here's a view of where I am so far with the painting, with that purple flower that I end up painting out. I'm starting to add in some of the smaller flowers. I actually painted out all of those purple flowers. Eventually, I just felt like they were commanding way too much attention. But I did want to show you putting in some of these smaller flowers using a small flat brush. I've put a fair amount of paint on my brush, and I'm doing each petal with a very significant intentional stroke. I'm figuring out you don't want them to all be at the same angle so that those flowers look like they're slightly turned. The petals would be coming at different angles. And it helps to have a photograph to go by. But once you've done this kind of thing for a while, you'll get to where you can just kind of turn your brush and they'll look right. And I enjoy putting in different centers. Most of the ones on this painting, that one, the little ones, I'm doing a yellow ochre. I also like to use a dark brown and use sort of a raised center. It can be pretty too. So just want you to see those. And as I put little flowers like those in, I like to be sure and put them in clusters. Flowers aren't going to grow equally spaced out like little soldiers on a field. So they need to come in clumps, and your painting will look a lot more realistic. Also, at the bottom of the center of your flower, put a line of a color that's slightly darker. That'll help that have nice perspective. So if I used a yellow ochre at the bottom, I would use a lighter yellow at the top of that center. Now let me show you how I put in zinnias. I'm using a small flat brush. I'm using cadmium orange, which I think is just such a beautiful color. And I'm doing those petals flat out from the center and then out from the back of that center. So I'm looking at a photograph of some zinnias in a field, and the petals stick out very straight. They don't have a lot of curve to them. And I'm trying to turn those. I got the back ones a little too pointed. It would help if you would put in the center first. And I usually do that with flowers, and I don't know why I didn't on those. But here's another one. And I have cad orange, and I've taken a little alizarin crimson. That's the red that you're seeing mixed in there. So I'm just dipping my brush in both of those and letting them mingle. And I'm trying to keep that flower fairly flat, and the stems of that are going to go just straight down. So it'll look like a zinnia when we get finished. So I just started filling in zinnias, mixing those colors a little bit, mixing the oranges and the reds, and just trying to vary it. No flower is going to be a solid color regardless of what color you use. It's going to have some lights and darks. So if you can vary that color within your flowers, they're going to look a lot better. And of course, putting a little dollop of something right in that center, and voila, you've got a flower. The next flower I'm putting in is a cone flower, and to do that, I have a flat bottom and a half round top. That can be oval or it can be very circular, but it's definitely got a rounded top. I'm using burnt sienna for that to start. I use a round brush to put that in. Then I'm going to use alizarin crimson mixed with white or my pink. I'm using my round brush again, and I'm going to start putting in those petals. When I start at the base of the flower, I'm putting more pressure so that the stroke is wider, closer to the center of the flower. And as I go out, I release that pressure a little bit so that that can get a little thinner. I'm varying these strokes. I want these petals to look slightly different. I want some of them to look like they're in shadow, some of them to look like they're in light. So I go back in, add more red, add more white, whatever's needed to achieve that. One thing I want to mention that is so important when doing this kind of painting is you want to have things that are underneath other things and things that go on top. There needs to be a lot of overlap. So even though I ended up taking out that purple flower, I wanted it to appear like that purple flower was in front of one of the pink flowers. So I do that throughout the painting. You're going to see as I'm adding more and more, you'll see me putting layers in front of other things. I typically add my greenery last because that's where you really get that illusion of layering. Here's where I am. And in looking at this, I decided that third sunflower that's near the bottom left, I decided I didn't like that. I wanted to do a sunflower that was more connected to the one above. So I just painted that out. I have really become fearless. I use paint like people use an eraser on the end of a pencil. If there's something I don't like, I don't try to work around it anymore. I just paint it out and do something else, and I end up with much better paintings. I just really encourage you to get fearless about painting things out. So I couldn't decide for the longest time what I was going to do at the top of that painting. In the original photograph, it had flowers and grasses that went all the way to the top, but since these sunflowers ended up being bigger and more prominent than I had meant when I first started, I just thought, well, do I carry more of those up to the top? Do I put in some blue sky? But I really love the idea of the whole thing staying green. So my solution was to just fill in that space with a lot of big sunflower leaves. And the leaves can really add a lot of drama to a sunflower painting. So I'm going to speed this up a little bit, but that's what I decided to do with that top area. And I really love how that turned out. This is why it's a good idea to pray when you're painting. No kidding. I love those two sunflowers connected. I think that just upped the painting tenfold from where it was with the three flowers separated. What a difference that made. Just love it. Now if I can just get rid of those purple flowers, we'll be on our road. You'll notice I'm adding in the stems of the sunflowers. I typically, in paintings like this, get all the flowers in and then add the stems, but I felt like those were such big stems, it was important to go ahead and get those put in. And sometimes if you've got a type of flower that goes little bitty petals up the stem, it helps me to get the stem in and then add the flower. So just wanted you to see this from a different perspective. So I felt like the top of the canvas still had too much empty space, and I didn't want to put any sky in there. So I decided to add these little flowers coming out at the very top, even taller than the sunflowers. So if you'll look at the top brush in our photograph, that is a Catalyst, a Princeton Catalyst poly tip round brush. It's a size 6. And below it, with the black handle, I have just your typical round brush. And see how much more silky and pointed the regular round brush is. This poly tip brush, the bristles are very stiff. The roundness at the head doesn't go into such a point, and because of that, it will hold quite a dollop of paint. So because that brush will hold a nice piece of paint, that's become one of my favorites when I'm painting something like that, when it's something dotty. It doesn't make the dots too small. They're thicker and rounder. It's a nice brush when I want to go back in and add highlights or put in darker shadows. It just, I don't know, it gives me a lot of control. I really love that particular brush for this specific application. I'm going to speed some of this up as I paint across the top of the painting, but just notice that I'm varying the shape, I'm varying the position of these stalks, I'm varying the thickness of them. I'll vary the color a little bit. A few of them, I'll have them curve over at the top so it looks like they're facing backward. Just try to keep things looking very organic and keep each one looking a little different than the one next to it. Here you can see that I've added in some of the stems, and you'll notice that some are greener, some are lighter. I tried to vary them a little bit so they look like they're different plants. And I'm getting ready to put in the thicker grasses. And I thought, wow, before I just jump on this painting and put these grasses on, I want to practice with some different brushes and some greens. So I got my angled brush back out. This is my sketch pad that I use a lot. If you don't have one, I really recommend you get one, if for nothing else, just to kind of experiment with things before you put them on your canvas. I'm using different amounts of pressure to get different strokes, just kind of flipping that brush back and forth, trying to decide, is that the brush I want to use? Do I want to try something else? Do I like that green? There I've gone to a filbert, which has more of a curved, rounded edge to it, where I was using an angled before. So just trying some different strokes, and I felt a lot more confident when it was time to go ahead and jump on my painting. So here I'm holding my breath a little bit, just thinking about where do I want those strokes to go. I'm not putting a lot of pressure on that brush. I'm trying to vary the strokes, and I'm trying to, in the darker areas, where it really gets dark underneath, I want to keep the greenery darker as well. When the background gets lighter, I'll go lighter with the greenery. And you'll be surprised when I show you the painting at the end. That really made a difference in keeping that dark area kind of pushed back like it was in shadow. It was a really nice effect. So you'll notice I've got some thicker, choppy strokes near the bottom. I'm turning that brush so everything, you don't want everything in a line looking like little soldiers. Again, you want everything to look as organic as possible. So here are some close-up still shots just to show you what those strokes looked like as I moved across the canvas. And you'll notice the color varies a little bit. Look in that back middle section how blue those grasses are, because they're in deep shadow and they're getting a little lighter as they come forward. So I wanted to show you in real time, I've slowed it back, just kind of how I'm putting these grasses in as we go taller in the painting. I have very little pressure on that brush. I don't have it loaded with paint. I'm doing small strokes. But as I go in front of a flower, and you may have trouble doing that the first time, but getting your grasses in front of flowers is what really gives it depth and makes it look full and realistic. So on a lot of those where I've gone over a flower, I had to go back with a second or third coat to get good coverage. But I'm taking it slow. I'm thinking about each stroke. I'm not overthinking it, and I'm getting those grasses light enough that they'll show up. You can't use the same value as the background or it'll disappear. That's why I love having some dark places in there so that those grasses are going to pop as they come off. Really love this process. It never fails. It's a beautiful way to paint, and it always ends up with a great effect. Something else that I love to do that I think adds such a cool effect is I take a regular round brush, which has a very pointed end, and I put some white or off-white on it and just put little dots all over my painting. I love the effect of that. It looks like tiny little white scattered flowers, and it's a nice way to just give one more layer to your painting. Here's another close-up where I've added some of the little white dots. Isn't that lovely? And I also added kind of that same principle. I added some yellow, tiny little flowers down in the base of the painting. And again, just remember to do things in clusters, sort of a yellowy orange there at the bottom. Again, it's just a little dotty thing. It's a nice little filler. It's a nice way to get one more layer of texture and one more color into your painting. So, what have we learned? If you're going to do a complicated scene, it's a great idea to make a thumbnail sketch first to work out a general composition. Make sure your thumbnail is the same shape, like a square or rectangle, as your canvas. Be sure to get plenty of areas of dark, particularly at the bottom, and I love to have some in the center of the painting as well. You can get lighter as you go up. Don't be afraid to use some browns mixed in with your dark greens. Always place the largest flowers first, making sure there's an odd number. As we discovered, sometimes it's better to clump and overlap your large flowers. I like having a variety of flowers and colors, but I stick with a basic color palette. For instance, I wasn't using corals or turquoises, just sticking with pinks and reds and greens. I realized later this is one of the few florals I've ever done where I didn't use blue except for darkening my greens. When you put in the stems, be sure to make them different colors and thicknesses so they really look like different types of flowers. Adding leaves can be a great filler. Use a sketchbook to practice brush strokes, colors, and flowers before putting on your canvas. And so important to this type of painting is to paint over existing flowers with other foliage. Let things overlap, particularly the grasses at the end. And most of all, have fun. Hey, I hope you've had as much fun watching as I had doing this painting. It's one of my new favorites. And if you liked it, would you mind giving this a thumbs up? It sure does help this little channel to grow. If you want to share it, add some comments, and if you'll hit subscribe, you'll be sure not to miss the next free video that's coming out soon. Thanks for your time. I enjoyed being with you today. God bless.